Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Commander Adventures. The recording for this first game was a little wonky, so that's why it took a while to get uploaded. However, this week we have a solid match of fairly high-powered decks. Starting us off, we have Danny, looking to overrun his opponents with Animar. We have Geo, using the graveyard as his primary resource with Muldrotha. Devin, playing the Banana Lord himself, Tasigur the Golden Fang. And finally George, who's looking to waste some time playing Kozilek the Great Distortion. Let's jump in. Danny starts us off. He shocks in a breeding pool, and uses it to cast a Birds of Paradise. Geo drops a forest, and passes. Devin cracks a Flooded Strand. He says he's gonna go find a breeding pool untapped, and then uses it to cast a Mystic Remora before searching. George drops an Urza's Power Plant, and uses it to cast a Sensei's Divining Top. Devin triggers Mystic Remora to draw a card. Dan shocks in a Steam Vents. He then brings out his commander, Animar. Geo drops a Hinterland Harbor, and then casts an Aether Spellbomb. Devin draws again off of Mystic Remora, and then Geo passes turn. Devin untaps. He drops the Snow-Covered Island for turn, and then remembers to sacrifice his Mystic Remora. He casts a Mana Crypt, and then taps 4 to cast an Oracle of Moldiah. He then drops a Strip Mine as a second land for turn. George untaps, and drops a Reliquary Tower. He taps a mana to activate Sensei's, rearranges the top 3 cards of his deck, and then taps top to draw a card. He then taps his remaining mana to cast the Mana Vault he grabbed with Sensei's. Danny untaps, and drops an island for turn. He taps 4 to drop his own copy of Oracle, and then reveals the top card of his library. Geo drops a Woodland Cemetery for turn, and taps 2 to drop a Survival of the Fittest. Devin untaps, and then loses his Mana Crypt flip. He takes 3 damage, and then draws for turn. He plays a Swamp, and a Drowned Catacomb from top of library with Oracle's effect. And then he taps 4 to drop a Glenelendra Archmage. George untaps, and then drops a Sanctum of Ugin for turn. He then recasts his top. Danny untaps, and casts Solemn Simulacrum with Animar's Reduction. On cast, Animar gets another +1/+1 counter, and then Danny grabs a mountain from his deck. He then taps his Birds of Paradise to cast a Wood Elves, once again triggering Animar. He grabs a Stomping Grounds, and as he shuffles up, George steps the game back a few seconds to the Wood Elves trigger, and activates top. As George rearranges the top 3, as he moves to end step, Devin strip mines his breeding pool. In response, Geo taps for a green, and discards Dryad Arbor to activate Survival of the Fittest. He reveals Gilded Drake, and then Danny's turn ends. Geo untaps. He then casts a Gilded Drake, and exchanges control of it in Danny's Animar. He then drops a Mana Confluence for turn, and casts his own copy of Oracle of Moldiah for 1 with the reduction cost from Animar. This triggers Animar. At end step, Devin casts a Mystical Tutor. Devin tutors up an Hour of Promise, and moves to his turn. Devin untaps. He then takes 3 damage from Mana Crypt on his upkeep. He plays a Forest for turn, and not wanting to lose the Vampiric Tutor he revealed with Oracle, he delves his graveyard and taps 3 to cast Tasigur. George untaps, and plays an Urza's Mind for turn. He taps Sensei's to draw an additional card, and then taps 4 mana to drop a Mystic Forge. He looks at Sensei's on top of his deck, and then casts it thanks to Mystic Forge. He activates Sensei's after deciding he doesn't like the top card of his library, and rearranges them accordingly. Danny untaps. He taps 2 to cast a Coiling Oracle, and takes Sakura Tribe Elder to hand with its ETB. He then casts Steve, and without his commander or lands to play, he passes turn. Geo untaps, and then casts a Coiling Oracle. He reveals a Jace the Mind Sculptor from his trigger, and also puts a +1/+1 counter on Animar. Geo then discards a Reclamation Sage to activate Survival of the Fittest, and grabs a Muldrotha. He plays a Polluted Delta from top of library thanks to Oracle, and then loses a life to Yavimaya Coast to cast Muldrotha. He triggers Animar, and then draws 2 from Muldrotha entering. He then cracks the Polluted Delta, and in response, Danny sacrifices Steve. Geo shocks in an Overgrown Tomb from Polluted Delta, and Danny brings a Forest in tapped. From there, Geo shocks in a Watery Grave as his second land for turn. He then moves to combat, and swings Danny's Animar at Devin for 7 commander damage. Devin chooses not to block, and goes down to 24. Devin untaps, and takes 3 from Mana Crypt. He then casts an Hour of Promise, bringing in Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth and Cabal Coffers tapped. He follows up with his own Polluted Delta, and cracks it to grab an island. At his end step, George pays 1 to look at the top 3 with Senseis. George untaps, and spends 4 in his upkeep to untap Mana Vault. He plays an Ash Barrens for turn, and taps 4 to cast a Solemn Simulacrum. He wastes the ETB trigger, and after shuffling up, he exiles the top card of his library with Mystic Forge. After looking at the new top card of his library, he passes. Danny untaps, and casts a Fauna Shaman for turn. He then moves to combat, and agrees to trade his Solemn Simulacrum with George's so they both get a draw. Once again unable to find lands with Oracle, Danny passes. At his end step, Geo takes the damage from Mana Confluence to activate Aether Spellbomb. He bounces Glenalendra Archmage back to Devin's hand, and then casts Vampiric Tutor. He puts an Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger on top of his library, which is revealed thanks to Oracle and Moldiah. Regaining priority on his end step, Danny flashes in Venser Shaper Savant and bounces Animar back to hand with the ETB. Geo untaps, and casts a Toxic Deluge in his main one, paying 5 life to wipe the board. With that out of the way, he passes turn. Devin casts his own Vampiric Tutor on Geo's end step, and goes to find a card to put on top of library. Devin untaps for turn, and manages to avoid damage from Mana Crypt. He casts a Chromatic Lantern, and then passes. George untaps, and pays to untap Mana Vault during his upkeep. He rearranges the top 3 of his library with top, and uses his remaining 4 mana to cast Unwinding Clock from the top of his library. Danny untaps, and George untaps his artifacts alongside him. Danny casts a Muldrotha for its evoke cost, draws 2, at end step, George taps Mana Vault to activate Senseis. Geo then entombs a Liliana the Last Hope. And finally, George taps Mystic Forge and pays a life to exile the top card of his library. George then reactivates Senseis. Still at Danny's end step, Geo loses a life to Mana Confluence, and discards an Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger to Survival of the Fittest to grab an Embercool the Promised End. Geo untaps, and George untaps his artifacts as well. On his main phase, Geo drops a Lion's Eye Diamond and cracks it, discarding his hand and adding 3 mana. He then taps 3 more to cast Muldrotha. With Muldrotha on the battlefield, he moves to cast Lion's Eye Diamond from the graveyard. Devin responds by casting a Pull from Tomorrow where X is 8. And chooses to discard a Waterlogged Grove. Geo then cracks the Lion's Eye Diamond for the second time this turn to cast Liliana the Last Hope. He downticks her, milling a Pact of Negation and a Simic Signet, and returning Gilded Drake to hand. He then taps 4 and loses a life to recast Oracle of Moldiah. He plays a Tainted Isle from top of library, and a Polluted Delta from graveyard thanks to Oracle and Muldrotha respectively. Devin untaps, and takes 3 from Mana Crypt. He plays a Boseiju tapped for turn, and cast a Torment of Hailfire for 15 in his main 1. Geo cracks his Polluted Delta. When George regains priority, he activates Sensei's Divining Top and rearranges the top 3. Geo shocks in a Breeding Pool. With Torment still on the stack, Geo discards Gilded Drake to activate Survival of the Fittest. And realizing he has nothing in his deck to stop it, lets Torment resolve. George sacrifices and discards enough to only take 21, and Danny discards a total of 5 cards, reducing the damage he takes to 30. George discards an Eldrazi Titan, and shuffles his graveyard into his deck. Danny shuffles his Blightsteel back in as well. Devin then moves to end step and discards down to 7. George untaps. He drops the Gaia Reach Sanitarium for turn, and casts Kozilek during his main phase. He refills his hand with its cast trigger and passes to Danny. Danny drops an Animar, and then casts Fierce Empath, grabbing a Maelstrom Wanderer and triggering Animar. Devin untaps, and then avoids Mana Crypt damage on his upkeep. He drops the Field of the Dead for turn, and creates a 2/2 zombie token as it enters. He then casts a Snapcaster Mage. He targets Torment with the ETB, and casts it for 15 again on his turn, uncounterable thanks to Boseiju. Torment resolves, and both Danny and George are eliminated. Game review. Devin was just so far ahead this game. His turn 1 Mystic Remora, which drew him 2 cards, into his turn 2 Mana Crypt, into an Oracle, was just a little too backbreaking. If anyone else had been able to draw into their ramp packages, they may have been able to answer his board more readily. But as it stands, both George and Geo missed. Danny's Animar deck was on pace to keep up with Devin, but the combination of Devin strategically strip mining his breeding pool, Geo stealing his commander with Gilded Drake, and finally missing so many land drops effectively shut him out of the game. I'd like to thank all the players for being a part of this game, and to give a quick shout out to Dungeon Games in Fort Myers for allowing us to film. If you're interested in being one of these videos, feel free to check out Dungeon Games on Tuesdays and Saturdays when Devin and I record. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know by liking it and leaving a comment down below. And be sure to subscribe to see more of our Commander content. I look forward to seeing you next week, and as always, thank you very much for watching.